Hello and welcome to Crowd Church, coming to you live from Liverpool this Sunday night. My name is Matt Edmondson, and whether this is your first time or whether you've been part of our journey since the beginning, it's brilliant to be with you. We are a community of people figuring out what it means to follow Jesus in real life. Not the polished, perfect version, but the messy, genuine, brilliant reality of this whole thing called Christianity. So let me give you a little roadmap of what's going to be happening over the next hour. We'll have a talk, lasts about 20 minutes, looking at the topic of relationships, which is the section of our series, Becoming Whole, that we are looking at, exploring how Christ makes us whole across every domain of life. After the talk, we've got Conversation Street. Oh yes, this is where we dig into what you've just heard and you get to be part of that discussion. So if you're with us live, jump into the comments, share your questions, your thoughts and your stories. And of course, if you're watching on catch up or listening to the podcast, then thanks for being part of the crowd too. Right, let's meet your hosts and let's get started. Well, good evening. Welcome to Crowd Church. Great to be with you online this evening, wherever you're watching in the world. My name's Matt. It's good to be with you. Yes, that was me in the video clip before, wearing the Goonies t-shirt. And obviously, I'm wearing a different outfit now. But anyway, it's good to be with you on this very cold, wet evening here in Liverpool. Beside me is the very talented and beautiful man, which is Dan Orange.
Good evening.
How are we doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Good. Yeah.
You sure?
I am. It is grim, but it's nice. It's nice in here.
Yeah, it is very, very nice and warm. Now, it's great to be with you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Do say hi. It's always nice to connect with people in the comments if you're watching live on YouTube. But this evening, we are talking about honoring your parents, this most bizarre of biblical commands, which is loaded with meaning, isn't it? An ideology that we're going to get into tonight. What does it mean? What does it look like? Why should I actually care? And to kick us into the conversation, on my left, the beautiful Jen Mariner is here. She's going to be doing the talk. Let me just quickly check the comments, actually, because you're not doing anything. I'll do it.
You can do everything, Matt. I'll just sit here and look at you.
You're just the eye candy.
Yeah.
Is that right? Warm welcome to you. Hey, Heather. Great to... thanks for commenting. Don't let Heather comment alone. Just join in with us. But I'll be in there while Jen is talking. Any questions, any thoughts, write them down in the comments. Because after the talk, like I said in the intro talk, we've got Conversation Street, where we're going to get into those questions. And after Conversation Street, for those of you who like to stick around, we're going to open up the Google Meet room. The URL Zoe is going to put in the comments at some point in the next few seconds. But that is go.crowd.church/meet, MEET. So do...
Not meat.
No, it's
not
barbecue. So you just have to spell it, don't you? But it is what it is. But yeah, come join us in the Google Meet. It'd be great to see you. Great to say how's it. Great to put a face to a name. So that's going to happen towards the end. But without further ado, let's hand over to the amazing Jenny Mariner. Jenny, over to you.
Good evening. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you. I have been here at Crowd a few times, but if you don't know me, my name's Jenny, and I'm one of the leaders here at Frontline Church, where Crowd is based in Liverpool. And it's always an absolute pleasure to be with you. And as Matt said, we are talking about honouring your parents, about biblical childhood, as part of the series that we've been doing here at Crowd about relationships. And there are two key verses that we're looking at today. If you take notes at all or want to look them up, the first is from Ephesians 6. It says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." And the second key verse we're going to be looking at is from the Ten Commandments. Matt's already referenced it. It's Exodus 20, and it says, "Honour your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." So the overall key point I'm going to make, talk in a nutshell, is that obedience is important in childhood and honour remains a permanent obligation throughout our lives. And that is whatever the dynamics in your family. Family dynamics are difficult, aren't they? And relationships can be difficult, but we are called to honour our parents throughout the lives of our parents. So we're going to look at 3 areas. We're going to look at biblical childhood. We're going to look at what it means to honour your parents as an adult. And then we're going to have a little look at the end at a couple of kind of modern dimensions and dynamics to that. So, starting with biblical childhood. As we just looked, the verse in Ephesians, it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for that is right." And that angle is consistent throughout Scripture. You know, one of the things loads people advise about Scripture is, what does it say at various different points in the Bible? Does it change? Is there nuance you need to wrestle with? Not really. There is nowhere in the Bible that says, children, do what you want. It's consistent, this thing of honour your parents. And teaching a child to obey is an interesting thing, isn't it? I don't know how many of you have children or are close up to parenting in any way. I have 2 children that are both under the age of 10. And so we're teaching obedience. But it's funny in this day and age, people talk about, well, how is your child feeling? Is your child neurodiverse? What do they want to do? What's their personality? And even like the debate as to whether or not you should teach your child to obey is quite an interesting one in this day and age that, to be honest, as a parent, I wasn't really expecting. And those are legitimate considerations. We do need to know our children. That's really important. But childhood is the time where we learn obedience. And it's part of learning our sense of place within our family and within our society. I spent 12 years as a secondary school teacher in a boys' secondary school in Liverpool. And there's one kid that particularly just sticks in my mind who just did whatever he wanted, which means he spent very little time in the classroom. He spent a lot of time wandering around the school. He'd shout through doorways, he'd nick things off people. He was constantly supposed to be in an internal exclusion, but he wouldn't go there either. I can't remember why we didn't just expel him. There was a complicated backstory. But I remember thinking, this child is not learning how to function in society. That is what learning obedience when you're young is about. None of us get to do whatever we want all the time, actually, do we? I did ask ChatGPT, has any society ever run with anarchy? Anarchy being where literally there's no government, there's no structure, there's no society, you do what you want. It has never worked, apparently, according to that search. That apparently, there's been a couple of little, a year in northern Spain, there was a little community that was an anarchist community. But at the end of the day, you need structure, you need leadership, you need some kind of organisation. It's always needed. The Bible teaches us that God created us in all our uniqueness, and yet God is a God of order. You read Genesis 1 and 2, and actually the chaos of the waters, God pushes the chaos back as he creates the land and creates all of the rest of creation. That's seen as a positive thing in that story. And then humans, the role in that story is that humans rule over the rest of creation. There is order. And so part of childhood, we obey our parents because it's God's command and it's teaching us about obedience. It gives us that social stability, as I've already said, that reflecting of God's divine design. Sorry, tripping over my words there. Divine design. We can't have anarchy. We need to obey if we want to function, if we want to play our part in society. It's also about our spiritual development. When we're children, we learn that we can trust our parents, most of us. Not all of us, but most of us learn we can trust our parents. And that helps us in terms of learning about trusting God. When I came to Crowd in February, I did a couple of talks about obedience and desire, again in Genesis, about how Adam and Eve wanted the fruit, but God told them they couldn't have it. And there's something about learning to trust and obey God, even when we don't really understand his instruction, that is really important. And we're starting to learn that by obeying our parents. So it's about social stability, it's spiritual development, and it's character formation. Learning to submit to legitimate authority, that dying to self, that humbling. When I was younger, I'll be honest, I didn't really like the idea of respect. It's a very out of fashion word, isn't it? And I was that narky teenager that once I became a secondary school teacher, I was like, oh, I really would not have liked me. And I did not like... Matt's saying he doesn't believe me, but honestly, I did not like respecting teachers until they'd earned my respect. And you hear that quite a lot in this day and age. Well, I'm not respecting someone, they need to earn my respect. But actually, again, it doesn't work like that beyond a point. In 1 Peter 2, Peter actually says, show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honour the emperor. You know, there's a sense of order. You can't just be rude to someone until they've earned your respect. And yeah, okay, you don't have to obey someone who's asking you to do something terrible, but that sense of having respect for people in society, government, teachers, healthcare workers, it helps us form our character, it helps us learn it's not just about us, and it helps us know where we fit. And it all starts in childhood with that relationship with our parents. We learn that obedience, you know, good parents teach us about respect, and it's all forming our character and helping us to function. In Colossians 3, verse 20, it emphasises this again. It says, children, obey your parents in everything because it pleases the Lord. That's pretty comprehensive. And it shows us that this is something fundamental that we need to learn. Now, of course, as I've already kind of hinted at, there are limits to this sometimes. You don't obey your parents or anybody that's asking you to break the law, or certainly no one that's asking you to go against God's will. But that isn't the case most of the time, is it? Those exceptions are not the case most of the time. You know, with my kids, I said they're both under 10. I'm at that stage of really needing them to learn, like, yeah, okay, there might be a bit of a conversation about this, but ultimately, you need to respect me as your parent and you need to obey what I say. I have the final decision. So that childhood obedience is biblical and is actually really important in terms of how we grow and how we function well. But then as we become older adolescents and become adults, we need to figure out how we relate to our parents as an adult, don't we? You get that sense. I don't know if you've heard people talk about, are you in an adult-child relationship or an adult-adult relationship? We have to transition into relating to our parents as adults. And I'm going to bring us back to that verse from Exodus 20 that says, honour your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. That doesn't say only until you're 18 or only until you're grown up. That is ongoing. Proverbs 23 says, listen to your father who gave you life and do not despise your mother when she is old. So those ideas of honouring and listening are not the same as obeying. And so we need to grow in developing that sense of honouring even when we're past needing to obey. And it's interesting to note in Ephesians 6, it says, honour your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And then it goes on, it says, honour your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. God is really making his point. He makes it in Exodus. He makes it when it's quoted again in Ephesians. He's making a point. This comes with a promise. If you honour your parents, you may receive long life on the earth. This is really important, knowing your place. Honouring your family is important to God. It comes with this blessing. So for all of us, there's something we need to wrestle with here, whatever your circumstances. You know, we can't stay like children. We've all seen that, haven't we? The adult child who's still a child. And, you know, maybe it's mum that still dominates what's going on. I mean, it's not a great look, even when you're single, is it? Let's be honest. We've all seen that, like, 25-year-old man that's still a child. But it really isn't good when you get married. Like, you can't still have your parents parenting when you get married, or, you know, it's bad. You just kind of slot into treating your spouse like your parent because you haven't learned to function like an adult. So you need to figure that out. But equally, you don't want the overbearing parent, do you? Who just won't give the child any space. I mean, you get this a bit in the West, I think, but you also get this, you know, I've seen this in like comedy sketches from other cultures. The like overbearing parent who still thinks they're in charge. And we've got to wrestle, haven't we, with how do you become an independent adult while honouring your parents? You know, I said you get this in comedy sketches, but I think there's also a lot we can learn from other cultures. I think there are many other cultures that are better at this than we are here in the West. Or another option is to throw your parents off entirely and say, I'm an adult now, It's all about me. You can't hold me back. You have no wisdom. I'm going to do what I want to do. You know, that's probably where I was when I was 18. My parents, they're both still alive, and I want to honour them, so I don't want to share too much about what my childhood was like growing up. But my parents made a number of decisions and had stuff going on for them that I didn't think was great. And they got divorced when I was 18, and my emotional kind of response for that was to be like, well, I want nothing to do with you. And, well, not in the sense that, like, I loved them. I spent time with them. I didn't cut off my relationship with them, but I didn't honour them. I didn't respect them. I didn't think they had a single thing to say that was of any use. And I know that God has taken me on a journey around honouring them because they are my parents. Now, I don't have to agree with everything they said. I don't have to obey them. I don't have to look back on what happened and think that they were right, but I can still honour them. Honour in the Bible is about treating someone with proper respect and value. It's about saying, you are my parent. You birthed me. You raised me. You did your best, even if actually your best was inadequate. I don't know if there's anyone else who has to wrestle with that. You know, even parents that have children taken away from them in really bad circumstances have often done their best. So how do you wrestle with honouring a parent because they're your parent and treating them with respect, even if there is pain that you need to unpack and things that you need to deal with? Honouring parents includes things like verbally talking about them with respect, as just saying, treating them with dignity, even if, you know, I think lots of us with our parents will have things we disagree with, things that we have to forgive, things we've ended up talking to a counsellor about, but you can still treat them with respect. You can be careful about how you talk about them, where you talk about them, and honouring them for who they are. You can seek wisdom from them and show them value by doing that. You know, you don't need to obey them anymore as an adult, but can you ask their opinion? Can you include them in what you're doing? You know, except for those extreme circumstances, most of us have areas where our parents will have wisdom that they can give us, and it honours them to give them the time and space to do that instead of rejecting them. And again, like I said, I went through that season of rejecting them, but there is something about learning, okay, when can I ask their opinion? When can they speak into my life? When is there something valuable that they've got to say? It's about regular communication. And, you know, in our world, that can look very different depending on our circumstances. Life can be quite busy, or it might be really busy for you and it's actually really quiet for your parents, and being aware of that. You know, my mum moved to Liverpool. She wanted to be closer to us. As I mentioned, she's on her own. And that means that we get to see her regularly if we want to. But when she moved, I was really aware. I was like, we might not see her. Like, life is really busy. If we don't make a plan, then we won't see her. So one day a week she picks the kids up from school, and a different day a week she comes for tea. So we've got those two touch points just like built into our rhythm. Or my husband's family, they all live at a distance, and routines and diaries don't line up very well for like regular phone calls, but we try and use technology. We try and send videos and messages, and we try and make sure that we book seeing each other. And again, you know, sometimes you can be like, oh, this is just inconvenient, but actually she's our family. She's my husband's mother. We want to prioritize seeing her as part of honouring and part of that communication with parents. So it's speaking about them with respect, seeking wisdom, communicating well. And then sometimes it's about emotional and practical support as parents age. In 1 Timothy 5, it says, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That is pretty harsh, isn't it? But you can see that sense of consistency in all the verses we've looked at, that God is saying something about family and how it really matters. Similar to God talking about honouring your parents leading to long life, there is something that God wants us to really think about here. You know, even when Jesus was dying on the cross, John 19 talks about him, you know, he's literally on the cross, and he looks at John and he says, take care of my mother. And I think, again, in Western cultures, this is something we really need to think about and mull on God's wisdom. One of the things I quite like is watching like real life documentaries. My husband does not like this kind of thing at all, so I watch them on my own. But I like that one, the ambulance one on BBC, right? And all the paramedics doing this amazing stuff that I just couldn't even imagine doing. But it actually really breaks my heart watching that show, how much time paramedics spend with old, isolated people doing things that are actually really simple that you don't need a paramedic and an ambulance going to. But that old person has dialed 999 because they've got nobody else. And, I've watched this show enough times that I've thought, I do not want that to be my parents. That's not what I want for them. And I do joke with my parents because they're both alive. And like I said, they got divorced. That I'm going to need like a house with a granny annex on one side and a granny annex on the other side. And they can like come in and not meet each other, But you got to take these things seriously. We need to consider our responsibilities to our parents as they age. We're not responsible for them. And, sometimes we need to allow medical professionals to take over. But I think in the West, we still do need to wrestle with that question of how do we include them? How do we communicate with them? How do we honour them, even as they age and they're less able to function? My mum always talks about the 7 stages of life. She says that stage 4 is in the middle and like your whole body works and you can do everything. But she talks about how you start unable to care for yourself and potentially you might end life unable to care for yourself. It like mirrors. The Bible teaches us that our worth and our value does not change. We have value as a baby, unable to feed ourselves, and we have value if we live till a 90-year-old that is unable to feed ourselves. Even when we're less able to offer support to others, less able to give back to society, we have value. So how do we relate to our parents in those seasons? We honour them for who they have been, even when they're a shadow of that person. And again, I think this is a challenge for us that is part of our spiritual formation. Those seasons of caring for someone else are often really difficult. They're really like dying to self times when the Holy Spirit meets us and shapes us. Jesus modelled laying down his life for us, and that's part of how we're formed into his likeness. So, I don't have all the answers on this one. I haven't walked that yet. My parents are not at that stage. I have watched others do it and seen it's complicated. But I know that the Bible models something to us that is still relevant about what does it look like to engage with these questions? What does it look like to honour and care for our parents in these seasons and not just ignore them when they've become difficult or inconvenient? And I would say a word to parents here on this one too. I'm learning as I grow older that we never feel old. So any parents watching this or, bear in mind, engage with your children if they try and have this conversation with you. If they want to talk about things like how can they help you? Is your home still suitable for you? Are you in a community or at risk of isolation? The number of people I know who are like, actually, my elderly parent won't have this conversation. Like, let's help each other out and have these conversations. Finally, as I draw to a close, I want to touch on a couple of modern dynamics here. And the first is that despite everything I've said about honour and communication and respect and care, it is okay, it's biblical to have healthy boundaries. So particularly once you get married and start a family, Genesis does talk about you leaving your mother and father and being one flesh with your partner. So as we've already said, if your parents are overbearing, it is okay to put a boundary up and say, I honour you, I respect you, I listen to, but I'm making the decision that is right for my family and my partner. Your parents mustn't come between that. And same in terms of the time you spend with your parents, the money you spend with on your parents. It's not for your own family to suffer. But you can put up boundaries as well if you have been in a situation that's been harmful or abusive, which is a reality, isn't it? You need to manage those risks while finding a way to still honour your parents. That's okay to do that. And the last thing I want to mention is that we don't all live in an ancient Near Eastern culture where our parents are probably in our tent or in the tent next to us. We're dealing with complexities of the 21st century, aren't we? Our parents might be at a distance, or they might have really complicated health issues that just wouldn't have been a thing in the past. And it is okay to look for creative solutions. I've already talked about, using videos and messages to keep in touch with my mother-in-law. There might be church community that need to help you out. But the principle is the same. What does it look like to honour your parents, wherever they are, whatever's going on? We can apply all these principles in the 21st century. So in conclusion, I'm coming into land now. The biblical role of being a child is about obedience, which is really important because it shapes all kinds of things for our adult life and helps us function well in society. But the instruction to honour doesn't end when you're a child. It continues on into adulthood. And it's part of training us in all kinds of areas. It teaches us spiritual maturity and kingdom values, develops our character, helps us build community. It reflects God's divine order, and it helps provide practical care. So the teaching from such a long time ago is still absolutely as relevant now as it was then. That we honour our parents in our childhood, we obey them, and we're formed as we continue to honour and engage with our parents for the whole of their lives. That's part of God's eternal purposes for his people. Amen. So I am going to hand back over now to Matt and to Dan.
Don't go anywhere, though.
I'm not going anywhere.
That's the important thing. Great. Welcome to Conversation Street. So what stood out to you about Jen's talk? Write that in the comments. And we're going to start digging into this. So Heather opened it up. I like this. She said, I'll start the ball rolling with something a bit controversial. So I thought we'd just jump straight in, Jen. I believe society has swung too far in the reverence of youth and boundaries, and respect for elders is no longer a thing. Discuss. I'm quite curious to know what you think about that, Zoe, actually. My daughter is here. Just to put out, Zoe's working the tech, my daughter, and she's like, what are we doing tonight? And I said, oh, Jen's talking about honouring parents. She's like, oh, that's why you want me to come. Right? So I'm kind of curious. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think that's going to be that controversial in this room. I mean, that's probably what I meant with myself, that like as a teenager and a young adult, I wasn't terribly respectful of others in authority older than me. I do think it's a thing that can be liberating for young people, almost that naivety of thinking that you know better. It can release kind of all kinds of, like creativity and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't think you're going to get that controversial in this room, the fact that we shouldn't write off the value of older people, what they can bring.
Yeah. I think it all often gets into the argument that, well, life is very, very different now. So therefore you don't know anything about the past. But when you were talking, I was looking what the Bible says sort of about the word honour, and apparently it literally means heavy. It's like weighted, and I thought that's really good that we should look and listen to our parents and weigh it like it's a weighty thing. They might not have had tech, but they've still had life. Years. Just experience is amazing, isn't it? And you can throw the baby out with the bathwater so easily.
That's a really important point. When I was a teenager, I appreciate that was a long time ago, for Matt Cruz says it. But when I was a teenager, it was the same argument.
Yeah.
Right? It was the same argument. The adults were saying, "Oh, you youth, the youth of today, you don't know what you're doing." And we're like, "Oh, what do you know? Your generation just hasn't got a clue about modern worlds." And so it doesn't surprise me that the next generation's saying it. So I remember I was sat in Ben's. Ben's a local hairdresser, and I was sat at Ben's. And Ben was telling a story about one of his kids. And I just looked at Ben and I said, Ben, why are you surprised? Like, his son's like 18, 19 years old. And I'm like, when you were 18, 19 years old, did you feel like you knew everything? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, but somehow magically that's just not going to, affect your kids in any way. Like, fair play. So I think, I don't, like you, I don't know if it's controversial to say, Heather. I do think it is a repeated pattern, though. And the respect for elders, I remember hearing that all the time when I was a kid, respect your elders because you don't do it.
I wonder if maybe the slightly interesting thing is almost more like society's more accepting of it now than it ever used to be. So I don't know if young people are getting told as much as they were, like, actually the older people might have something useful to say into this. I think in terms of, I can't remember the words you said Heather quite used, I don't have it, but almost that sense of young people being the best rather than we've all got our place.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit of that going on, which I just don't think is that healthy.
Young people rule. It's an interest. No, but it's true, isn't it? And I think I quite like the arguments either way, you know. And I you know, do not let anyone despise you because of your youth, is what the Bible says. And I think, but there is this thing about respecting, like when I was a kid, I remember getting a clip round the ear. It's a good old British saying, isn't it? Clip round the ear from a policeman for riding my bike the wrong way down a one-way road. Do you know what scared me more about that? Was telling my mum. Because if my mum found out that a policeman had clipped around the ear, I would have got another clip around the ear. I would have got grounded. All kinds of bad things would have happened. I think probably the shift that I see in society now is if the policeman gives you a clip around the ear, the policeman's in trouble, right? Yeah. And I wonder if that maybe has gone too far the other way. I don't know. It's a bit political, maybe. So let me bring it back to honouring your parents. What advice would the parents here give to those like me who are adults but are the kids in this scenario in terms of what can they do to honour their parents? So you've touched on this a little bit, Jen, like adult kids honouring their parents looks different to obedient kids, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think like we were saying, there's still that thing of, are you still listening to them? Are you giving them time? You know, one of the things my mum said to me is like, you're always in such a rush, you don't have time to hear me. And actually letting her know, I think I do better than I used to, because I've tried to be really intentional and be like, actually, I value her and I want her to know that. So if it costs a little bit for me to slow down a little bit to listen to her, then that's okay. I think, as you said, making time for them, you know, not just allowing it to be a really long time since you last spoke to them, because actually your life is really busy. Yeah. You know, trying to make sure that you see them. And there are all those things that we can do before. You know, we also talked about when your parents need you kind of physically maybe, but before you get to that stage, when you're just living your adult life, it's remembering that your parents are still there. And they're not just there when you need them. Yeah. But actually, it's just nice and kind to keep a good relationship with them. Yeah. Maybe they need you.
Yeah. Text them, call them. What do you do with your parents? Because your parents aren't Liverpool based, are they?
No. So they live about 2 hours away, but they're actually moving back to Liverpool for the reason that they realise they're getting a bit older. We need them in different ways. We've got kids. It's great if they can be around more. But then also if they get ill, it's a long way for them. So it's great to have parents that have actually thought about that as well. Yeah.
Have you had, either of you, the difficult conversation with your parents, which is in the event of your death or in the event of you becoming quite ill, what do we want to do? Or is it like, when that happens, we'll wing it kind of a thing?
Do you mean more when you get quite ill? Because you said in the event of death, but that's like...
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think about my parents and Sharon's parents. It's like, obviously they're aging. At some point, they will go to meet their maker. Hopefully it's not too soon. Or, you know, what happens... like in the comments, and Dan, I mean, obviously you can talk to this because I think you've had a recent case of this. My mum has Alzheimer's, and we now have moved into a very different set of roles. It's hard to take on the role of carer from someone who always looked after me. Neither of us are comfortable with it. And this comes to that question, isn't it really? Like, when kids become the full-time carers of their parents, and what that is and what that looks like.
Yeah, it does change very, very quickly as well. So yeah, like Matt said, my mother-in-law 2 months ago was very, very ill, just hours really away from dying. And so it has changed the last 2 months, and Lisa's role has been so much more looking after her. Life has changed a lot. She's doing amazingly well now. She's round as for tea, which wouldn't have thought would have even happened a few weeks ago. But it was just we had to go into that role. I think it's different if potentially it's a lot longer period. I know with my parents, my grandparents were, like 101 and 98. They had very good lives. But grandma got Alzheimer's, so really didn't. That relationship's gone. You can honour them as a person, but they didn't really even know who mum was. So it's just commitment. Yeah.
And I think those scenarios, I haven't walked it myself, but I think knowing when you need the medical care with things like that, you hear really difficult stories of people trying to care at home for someone actually that's beyond.
Yeah.
So it's knowing when you need the medical care, when someone does need to go into a home or a hospital or whatever, but still knowing what honouring them looks like through that, treating them with respect, communicating well. I think the other thing I heard recently that just really made me think was that we like our dignity, don't we? It was actually around the whole euthanasia debate, which I don't particularly want to get into, but someone was saying, I would want to have euthanasia myself because I don't want to lose my dignity. And the other person was like, maybe we just need to accept that we lose our dignity.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, so when my mum was saying about, you start with someone wiping your butt and you end with someone wiping your butt. Like, maybe there is something there that's, yes, it's extremely difficult. I can see the comments from Heather, and my heart, goes out to you, Heather. It's extremely difficult, isn't it, to get your head around the person who wiped your butt that now you need to care for.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it is part of life. Yeah. The beauty of life that God's made. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I think actually in the West it's not something that we talk about enough. I think our culture is different from a lot of cultures around the world, isn't it, where this sort of intergenerational care happens automatically. Not so much in the UK or in the West. And there's very much a route which is, you live as long as you can and on your own, and then you're going to go live in a home, and then
we might come and visit.
Yeah, we'll come visit like once a week or whatever. I remember growing up, my grandmother, she lived in a what do they call it now? Assisted living, residential care type place. And we went to visit her once a month, and she seemed, like she quite enjoyed it. She tried living with my uncle, and I think after a while it just became evident that wasn't going to work. So, I don't know the full in and outs, but I think as a society, we don't. This is what I was talking about. Have you had these conversations yet? Because we don't talk about it, and it's like all of a sudden we're now faced with this scenario that I don't actually know how to deal with it because we've not had the conversation. And so it's a complex one, isn't it? And I would just encourage people to have the conversation, one, ahead of time. It's a lot easier to deal with these things ahead of time. And also, I don't think honouring means actually becoming someone's full-time carer. But in some instances it might. I think these things are unique.
I think like Jenny said about boundaries, and it could be that you're a carer for a period, but if you've got family and other things going on, you also have to look after them and yourself. So there does have to, majorly hard decisions, but there does have to be those boundaries as well.
One comment, which I quite like this phrase: how you treat your aging parents teaches your kids how to treat you when you're old. That's quite a scary thought, isn't it? Just ignore everything, Zoe. Just ignore everything. That will be useful. So let's switch tack slightly, because maybe one of the obvious questions, and I think something that I've seen a lot actually over the years. We talk about it in Christian circles. I mean, you mentioned it earlier about when you get married, you leave. The Bible talks about you leave your mother and father, and that is, you still honor them, but there is this sense of leaving their way of doing life, and you are creating your new way of life. So the obvious example will be Christmas traditions, right? You leave those and you create a new sense of Christmas tradition. But I've seen quite a few marriages where mum has not left. Mum's still involved a little bit, either with the daughter or with the son. With the mum, where she's never quite convinced that the wife is looking after her son quite like how she ought to, or whether the mum is just always interfering with the daughter somehow. Have you guys experienced that? Any thoughts on this?
We caught up with some friends just last week, actually, who were really good at this with her parents, who as a couple, they didn't earn very much money, but they knew that was around certain choices that they'd made. And her parents kept trying to give them money, but then the money came with influence. And, and they were really good actually at standing up to them. And, they've got a really good relationship with them. I would say they did this with honor and with respect, but saying, actually, these are the choices we're making for our family. And you clearly don't agree with us. You're making that quite evident. But these are the choices we're making for our family, and actually we're not having your money.
Yeah.
I've reflected on that over the years I think they did that really well as a couple, and they demonstrated also talking about that as a couple. It was her parents, but she was very sensitive to when it wound him up. And I think being careful that your own parents don't come in between you and your partner, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you ever find yourself taking the side of your parent against the side of your spouse, I think that's worth having a think at that point.
Yes.
And it does, from experience, it does come up, and it comes up from different sides. You think, well, my parents, I think what they did was right, but then you're putting down your. But going back to the last few weeks, we talked about motherhood and parenthood and fatherhood, and when you grow up, those roles change. So I think someone mentioned that as being often like a mother, sometimes we've got this whole thing of we want to be friends with our kids, and you lose the fact that you're the parent. But as you grow older, then there is roles do change. There is a friendship, but if that friendship then has that boundary is completely gone, then it does lose. Especially if you're married, there's whole sort of issues that can come in there.
I guess the reality is, in a marriage, your spouse has to be your primary person, and it can't be anybody else. Whether that's a sibling or a parent or a colleague or someone you met in the pub. Or, you know what I mean?
I yes and no. Right now, I'm gonna swing slightly the other way here, because I do wonder. Let me just preface this. I think I agree with everything that everyone said, right? That actually, if I take the example of my mum, I think has been a legend. It's not interfered in our marriage, not had any expectations upon me and Sharon. And as a result, her and Sharon got on really well. They talk more than me and mum. In fact, my mum likes her more than she likes me. I know I am like bottom of the pecking order right now. There's the grandkids, there's Sharon, and then there's me, just right down there. That's okay. But I'm also aware that I am married to Sharon, and her dad is called Brian. Now, I would fully expect Brian, if I wasn't treating his daughter well or right, to take me aside and say, sort yourself out, son, because you need to. Do you see what I mean? So I think, on one hand, parents won't get involved, but I think at some, I don't know, I think if it was one of my kids, I would step in and go, this needs to change.
But I guess even in that, you're talking about doing it in a healthy way, like him coming and talking to you. Like, imagine how unhealthy it would be if someone was in Sharon's ear. He's not treating you very well. I guess there's healthy ways, aren't there? But no, I would completely agree with you. There's a space for things like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it says here, my mum isn't abusive, but she's really difficult, constantly critical, boundary crossing, and makes everything about her. I avoid her because every conversation leaves me exhausted and feeling bad about myself. It's interesting, isn't it? Am I being selfish, and how does this connect with honouring your parent? And I think it's worth saying actually on there that honour doesn't mean unlimited access to you or letting someone repeatedly hurt you.
Yeah.
I think sometimes honouring is actually establishing really good boundaries, and sticking with them. But it's I think here's the thing, right? I think hurt people hurt. Not all the time, but I think if there is a reason your mum is being like that, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but that hurt people hurt, right? So there's something which is driving that, that needs to be dealt with. And I think as a Christian, our response in that situation is to forgive, but it is also to establish quite firm boundaries. And I think, like your friends with the money, I think that's great. These are the boundaries, right? This is where we do not cross. Which is ironic because when we raise our kids, we're in effect establishing boundaries, aren't they? And here the kids are establishing boundaries with the parents.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say too much out of trying to honour my own parents, but I would say my personal experience is the more I've dealt with stuff like that myself, like with therapists, with friends, the more I've been able to then not have to put such a strict boundary all the time. Like you might find you have to put a really strict boundary in one season, but the more you can access your own healing for what's happened in your childhood, in your past, or even now, I think you can, I would say my own testimony is then being able to find a way of navigating things of a similar ilk, you know, of like, okay, I can handle this. This is the boundary, but I can handle this because actually I've dealt with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus was quite sort of, his comments are never really that great, are they? They're quite definite. But right at the beginning of his life, when he was in the temple, he was 13, and his parents were looking for him. They'd lost him, and he was, well, don't you know I should be about my father's business? And that was to his parents. You know, it was respect, but it was like, well, this my calling is my Father in heaven. And then, but then, as you mentioned, when he died, it was like, John, look after my mother. He didn't disregard them, put them out of the way. They were evident. They were respected. Yeah. But his calling from God was higher, and that those boundaries came in.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And another question then to ask around this is, what about abusive parents? So sometimes we have dysfunctional relationships with our parents, and sometimes that dysfunction actually turns into abuse. And I mean, the Bible, being the book that it is just full of examples of dysfunctional parents. So I think immediately of David, whose son rapes Tamar. Is it Tamar gets raped? And then Absalom is like fuming that David doesn't do anything about it, and the kingdom ends up getting split. I mean, you talk about crazy dysfunctional stuff going on. It's all in the Bible. You see it right from the beginning. Cain and Abel, the first kids, one ends up killing the other. I mean, it's not it's not what you'd call happy families, is it? And so, but I think there's some real dysfunction there that we have to be aware of. So the Bible talks about honoring your parents in the midst of also providing all these examples. Like you mentioned Jesus was honoring to his parents, but Mary thought he was crazy halfway through his ministry. She goes, "You're nuts, lad." Do you know what I mean? You need to be committed. Maybe the Message translation puts it that way, but in essence, that's just what it was saying. But it's one of those where there are these dysfunctional relationships, but in the midst of it, it does talk about honoring. So we have to be, like you say, clear on what honoring means and what it doesn't mean. What's your thoughts on abusive parent relationships?
Well, I mean, you definitely have to keep yourself safe. And I think there isn't anything that would suggest otherwise in Scripture. I would say, so you need to figure out what that boundary is. And I think, worst case scenario would be no contact at all, and then looking at what even contact could you have, you're sending a Christmas card, but that's pretty worst case scenario. But I think we do have to protect ourselves, and we do have to figure out what in those situations we can do. I would still say that there's something, when I was talking about how you speak about your parents, I would probably say even in those scenarios, to not be blurting it out everywhere all the time, but thinking about where you share it and where you talk about it. Not saying we should keep secrets, but I think that is part of respect even in those scenarios. But I think it's okay to put boundaries in, and really harsh ones. If actually you've been in an abusive situation, there needs to be a harsh boundary, then there needs to be a harsh boundary. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the commandments are still the commandments, aren't they? You know, his word is ultimate, and we can't. It doesn't mean ignore, and it doesn't mean ignore abuse, and it's like there's some respect. There's your chances of repairing a relationship are greatly increased if you're not blurting about everything that's happened. But there's absolutely got to be boundaries there.
Yeah, I think, and this is where I think understanding the topic of forgiveness and honouring is really important, because that doesn't mean letting people off the hook. And I think sometimes there has to be consequence. And there, with abuse especially, I think things have to be reported because it has to stop.
Yeah.
And so I've not had abuse from my parents, far from it, but there have been times where I've been subject to abuse, and it's not a forgiveness issue. But I did feel the need to report it because it needed to stop in case it wasn't just me. Yeah. So letting them off the hook is not forgiveness. It's not honouring. But like you say, I think in the midst of all of that, I can't choose, or you can't choose what your parents did or did not do. But you can choose your response as a result of that. Yeah. And I think that's where the power lies. I think that would be my observation, is too often I see people become victims, rightly so, but they stay there because of something that happened to them. And so the abuser still has the power. And I think where Christianity and the gospel comes into play is actually through forgiveness, through Scripture, you realize actually God has redeemed that and can give you that power back. And I think that's super, super important. Last, I'm aware of time, so let's get into the last one. Absent parents. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? How do you honour an absent parent? Because if you look at all the stats, you will realise quite quickly that absent fathers, especially, are connected to just about everything that's wrong with society. Most of the people in prison have got absent fathers. Most of the men that commit violent crimes, absent fathers. Adolf Hitler, Stalin, all of these people grow up without a father. Do you know what I mean? It's crazy how, when you look at the stats, how the impact that absent father has on the family unit. Now, we've talked about what it means to be a dad, but there's a question then, isn't there, in the midst of that, how can you be honouring to someone who was absent? Now, I know your dad. He was not absent.
No.
I don't know your dad, so I've no idea, Jim. But I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Like you, my parents divorced when I was young, so I was 9 years old. I saw my dad once or twice a week. So he wasn't absent, but he wasn't permanently there. And I see the impact that has. So how do we honour in that kind of environment, do you think? Asking all the hard questions tonight, hey? Glad you came.
Yeah, no, I think, that's what I was thinking. There's different kinds of absence as well, aren't there? Or isn't there? There's being physically absent, there's being physically present, but emotionally absent. I think what you're already saying about your own heart in all of it is really important. I did actually have a friend whose father had completely disappeared and had no contact with him for about 20 years and then reappeared on the scene. And it was interesting that he had just done enough forgiving that he was able to handle his dad reappearing on the scene. Yeah. And I'm not wanting to paint hope of everybody, your dad's going to reappear, but it was interesting that he'd done the business to deal with that rather than just sitting in the resentment. And I think it links to a lot of the other things you were saying of like processing that pain. Like honouring your parents does not mean failing to acknowledge the pain you might have from your childhood.
Yeah.
You've got to hold those two things in tension and still find out what can you do to honour them? What does honouring look like? It might be not very much.
Yeah.
I think it's okay if it's not very much.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I would agree. I think, what is God telling you to do? If you're a Christian, that would be my counsel. What do you feel like the Spirit of God is leading you to do when it comes to your parents, and honouring your parents? I think that's like super, super critical. And I think the other thing that I would say in all of this is, I didn't really understand what mum and dad went through as parents until I became a parent, right? I knew what it was like to be a kid because I'd grown up in there, but I didn't know what it was like to see it from their point of view. Because why would I? I was a kid. I was too busy thinking about myself. You know, it's not until you're in your mid-30s you stop really doing that, isn't it? But it's like, when I became a parent, I saw things quite differently. I was a lot more empathetic to some of the situations they faced, you know, like money stress and worries and the impact that has on family and all the stuff you've got to deal with. And I think my respect and my admiration for my parents grew when I became a parent myself. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You think before you're a parent that you're tired, that you have lots of things to do, and then you become a parent and you go, no, I wasn't tired. And I had, I had nothing to do. Yeah. I mean, it's that stark. Yes, I did have a lot more respect for parents.
Send all your emails and comments to Dan on that last statement. But no, that's fine. Any thoughts on this?
So I can't remember did we start on absent parents? Is that where it was?
Yeah, we're just talking about how our respect for parents grew when we became parents.
Yes, sorry, I just got distracted by thinking how much I agreed with what Dan said. So you can send all your complaints to me as well. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing, one thing I've just reflected myself, again, not wanting to share detail, but me and my sister have different approaches to some things in our family that my sister just desperately wants it to change. And she's always like, well, what about this? And what if we confront this? And what if we say this? And I have learned some peace, which I feel is God-given peace, from accepting my parents' limits and being like, they're not beyond change, but it's unlikely. And I can have more peace if I say, like, this is how they currently are. How do I honour and respect them and deal with them? And what are the healthy boundaries? And what can I do within the current scenario rather than rallying against it to change all the time? Yeah, that would be my final thought.
I've got one sort of question for you two. Is what about effectively not your earthly parents, but say if you've got step parents, or you've grown up with people that pretty much have been your mum and dad, but they're not your real mum and dad. Where does the Bible stand? Where do you stand on that, especially step parents? Because it must be very, very hard. I'm not in that situation. Do you still have to honour them?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, just maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But yes, I think. I mean, having had stepmums, was I honouring of them? You'd have to ask them. Probably not. I was a snotty-nosed teenager. But looking back, I wouldn't honour them necessarily as my mum, but I would definitely honour them in the role that they had.
Yeah.
And I think, but that comes back to what you were saying earlier about, you don't give respect to anyone until they've earned it. I think respect is something actually you should probably just give to everyone.
You lose it rather than have to gain it.
Yeah. And I think a bit like that experiment they did where the science professor gave everyone an A in the class and said, you've all got an A. Now you can only go backwards, right? Depending on how much work you do. And it worked really well, apparently. So I need to keep my A. And so I think giving respect to people, regardless of who they are in the family, is just like super critical.
Yeah, I guess the only it's not even a counter, but probably an additional thought would just be around, again, it's okay to have some boundaries around that. So I think that can be confusing. And you can even end up with the opposite scenario. I think I know a couple of situations where the step parent is probably the closer parent who it's easier to respect and honour, and the one that isn't there, you know. So I think there's a lot of complications around that I think it's okay to wrestle with. Going back to what Matt said a little while ago, ask God what he's saying to you about this situation, about this person. Thrash it out with him. See how it applies to you. Very good.
Okay. Well, that was a good conversation, Street. I feel like we're just getting warmed up. Any final comments from you, Dan?
No. I think that was really good, wasn't it?
Yeah, Jen.
No, I think other than what we're just saying, figure this out for you. It's not about applying some rules from thousands of years ago. But it does apply. There is a 21st century relevance to this, so figure it out for you.
Yeah, very good. And I think I'll just throw into that. Remember, your parents aren't perfect, but we expect them to be. And so grace for that, I think, is really important. Now, we are going to close down the live stream in just a few minutes. If you would like to come join us in the conversation, we're just going to hang out in the Google Meets. The link is in the comments. go.crowd.church/meet is the URL. It's in the comments, so come join us in that. We would love to say hi to you. Next week, I'm searching the deep recesses. It's Mike Harris. How did you know that? I just knew. Mike Harris is talking to us about brothers and sisters. What that means. I think you're hosting that as well. He's definitely got a few brothers and sisters, hasn't he?
I think he's beaten us. I've got three sisters and a brother. I think he's got even more.
Yes, so Mike Harris is going to be teaching on that next week. It's going to be great. How do we do the whole brother-sister thing in this whole topic of wholeness and having whole relationships? So hope you got a lot out of this one tonight. I think that's it from all of us. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully see you in the Google Meet room in just a few short minutes. But if not, have a phenomenal week wherever you are in the world. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.